Uh, I have a book out as part of my Grit series that is called Enemy Patriots, and it's set in World War II. And it is
Hmm.
basically the story of Japanese American family uh, living in California, but with business access out in the Aleutian chain at the beginning of the war, and how the teaser on the story is, the American government interned a lot of our Japanese American citizens because they thought they were spies, and some of them were, but for which side? And I I like to find tidbits like that. I found a number of stories where um, our Japanese American citizens were horridly, well, you know the stories, but they were horridly abused at that time, and yet at the same time, very instrumental to the war effort on our side. And
Hmm.
so this story is about that. But the thing that I love most about writing it is the story begins with 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old boys, three of them, caught in a storm, and how it shapes their whole life, that one storm, and carries through. And you and I spent enough time in rural Alaska and been in those villages and seen how those kids are shaped by one or two incidents that goes on in their life for the rest of their lives. Um,
Yeah.
I absolutely love to write that and to share that with the rest of the country, rest of the world.
Oh, you're right. You observe that tundra tough. There's so many, I I have those same kinds of experiences when I'm doing research. My problem is, and I suspect you have some of these same issues when you're researching, there's so much good material that I was down in Southeast Alaska in Juneau researching a earlier Arliss Cutter book. Um, called Bone Rattle, and in the underground, in mines, and all over the place. And I went down there with some ideas about exploring, how because it has to do with an artifact, and in native cultures, and the crossover, and modern mining versus artifacts. And then I stumbled across Funter Bay, which was the native version of what you're talking about with the Japanese internment. And and that's a whole book, and I just wanted to include it in this, where the government interred Alaska natives in these horrible conditions. I mean, Nazi POWs were treated better than we treated the people from St. Paul Island, and the government put them. But I couldn't put it in. It would have been shoehorning in
Yeah,
for my benefit. And
yeah,
so I'll use that someday, but
yeah.
it's definitely interesting.
I have a Funter Bay story. Right above my head is a black-tailed deer buck head, full mountain, that was killed in Funter Bay, standing on the dock at that old cannery where all those people were interned. And
Yeah.
I've spent, I don't know, days and days and days of my life roaming around there, bumping into old grave sites that are no longer
Hmm.
marked, and uh, going through the old dormitories that are now collapsed, and just stunned by how those people were treated. They were treated
Wow.
almost as enemies.
Yeah.
Um, and this World War II story I wrote, the Japanese American kid in this story, young man, uh, early 20s, was treated as by many people as an enemy, even at the same time he was doing intelligence work for the United States. And he couldn't blow his cover by having anybody come in and save him from that persecution, because his cover was that nobody, he didn't want either side to know which side he was really on. Um,
Hmm.
that but the Native American people that were pulled out of, especially the Aleutian chain, they didn't have any champions like that. I mean, they just took it, and the ones that
Mhm.
were sent to Japan were treated even worse. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That was pretty. There's a lot of little tidbits of history there, and I have to be careful that I don't shoehorn things in that
Yeah.
I
Well, that's what my second rewrite is always for, is to take all of that stuff and get it out. That doesn't
right.
that that doesn't work within the story itself. So
Yep. Yep.
Um, well, I'm working on an interesting book. Come out, well, working on. Have a book coming out in about July of next year. That is one of my Team Walker thriller series, and you talk about artifacts. Um, One of the things that I am fascinated by and study continuously is what's going on in the research of the cosmos. And I've been fascinated by this whatever it is that has come into our solar system from somewhere outside the solar system that some scientists believe is from intelligent life and others believe it's just an asteroid. Um, Interestingly enough, I wrote the book 2 years ago, and it is about something that comes into our solar system from outside the world. And um, I've always been fascinated by what the philosophers say about first contact. What will
Mm.
happen when we finally realize we are not alone? And most of them have said, well, it'll probably bring humanity together. And I don't believe that. So that's the gist of my story. I don't. It doesn't bring them together. Um, in the beginning. In the end, it will, but in the beginning, it does not. It just divides us even further because none of us are at our best when we're terrified. And we have this tendency to try to take care of ourselves first and those people, those close to us first, instead of thinking about all of us. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm guilty of that personally from time to time. Not very often. I'm generally more generous with my life than that. But there are times, there have been a couple of times when I was working in Russia that I got myself into situations where getting my own butt out of that jam was the only thing I was thinking of.
Hmm.
Um, and it's especially true because I was working with people who today in Russia um, would be severely persecuted under the current
Mm.
regime. And even during the awakening in Russia, the KGB, GRU, the intelligence services, they never changed. Um, Trump, Donald Trump's thinking that somehow he can communicate and shape Putin is an absolute mirage. And I have great respect for most of our foreign policy, but that one's a mirage because
Funny.
Putin's foreign policy was shaped when he was a young KGB agent and nobody trusted him. Um, do, do, are you, as you're in your Jericho Quinn series, are you getting back to writing more about some of the international issues that you had early in your Jericho Quinn books?
I do, but I don't write about real life. It's a different universe, and I
Mm-hmm.
I prefer, I believe in the Michael Jordan theory that Democrats and Republicans both buy tennis shoes. And so I'm not gonna buy into whether it's online or my friends know where I stand
Yeah,
politically, and I'm not shy about that. I believe in a yellow lines and dead possums are in the middle of the road. I take a stand. But
yeah,
when it comes to social media or podcasts or whatever, or my own writing, I want to write about right and wrong. And
agreed.
so so I do write about international and national issues, and oftentimes they overlap, as you were talking about with this first contact, they
Mm-hmm.
overlap just because it's in the zeitgeist. I wrote one of my early Clancy's was about deep fake videos when deep fake videos were easy to see and to identify, and how big leaps forward. Now that's not even that exciting anymore because they're everywhere. And that's just in a period of 8 years.
Yeah,
So I do write about an overarching politics and what goes on in the Oval Office and foreign powers and all that. But I try to stay away from. I mean, Russia's got. In fact, I even try to make it so instead of governments, it's evil actors within
mm-hmm.
governments.
Agreed.
Whether instead of saying China bad, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Russia bad, that's all there is to it. In my books, I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
this. I'm not
Yeah.
making a political stand, but I'll have evil actors within whatever, or in our own government.
I agree, and I think in my books the same thing. First of all, I really want you to understand why the bad guys are bad. So
Sure.
I developed my bad guys character probably as much or more than I do my good guy characters in the
Hmm.
books. Um, it's an old line, but one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, I
Hmm.
grew up much of my life in the Middle East, and that is the absolute God's truth there. It's a gospel. Um, and what's really amazing is you can have a conversation with one person about something going on in the Middle East, and you will hear both sides of that story from each person there. It's the most complex place I've ever been involved, and I've written about it in 2 or 3 of my books now. Um, but but the other side of that is sometimes you have to make a decision of what's right and wrong, and you can't win against the opposition unless there's something to be won, unless there's a victory to be had. And and when I write, I try to make it really difficult to sort out exactly what that victory is early in the book, but have it become clear during the book.
No, absolutely. I do want to write about right and wrong, and I want my,
Yep.
and I think you do this as well. Everybody thinks they're the star of their own movie playing in their head. They see
Yeah.
themselves as the hero, but I want my bad guys to be clearly defined bad guys,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean they're all evil. They have evil intentions. But they might, and even be terribly cruel. But they might have a daughter that they love, or a
Yeah.
mom they're taking care of, or whatever, because that's the way 99.9% of human beings are.
Right.
So I do try to make them three-dimensional, but at the same time, I want to point out bad is bad, evil is evil, and
Yeah.
like you said, you want to develop your character, your antagonist, because if you don't have a good antagonist, a well-developed, strong antagonist, it's not hard for your hero or heroine to beat them. And what fun is that?
Well, it isn't any fun.